So we're now in the summer months. Summer is a time that brings a little bit of a different pace. It's a time to slow down, to catch our breath, travel, go on vacation, spend time with family and friends. But I always remind you, the church meets all summer. So we have worship all throughout the summer. I feel like I have to tell people that every year for some reason. We don't close down. And there's a lot going on at Woodmont. Our church is maybe not as busy in the summer, but it still has a lot that's happening. You know, over the years, I've learned to just embrace the different seasons of life because they're all different. They all bring different things. And sometimes the pace of our lives can be so fast that we need to slow down, we need to breathe, and we need to enjoy being present with the people that we love. We're continuing our sermon series focused on timeless values in a chaotic world. And I'm preaching this series while launching a new book that's called What the World Needs Now. So these things are kind of going together. I'm talking about some of the things that I include in the book. But today I want to talk about three very important topics that are related to values. And those topics are money, time, and spiritual energy. Money, time, and spiritual energy. If I didn't know you, and if I wanted to get to know you better, I could ask you for two things. I could ask you for your bank statement and your calendar. And very quickly, without even having a conversation with you, I could find out what matters most in your life, what your priorities are. Because our money and our time clearly communicates our values. Sometimes people say that they have certain values, but if their money and their time don't back it up, then how serious are those values? Jesus clearly said in the Sermon on the Mount, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Heart follows treasure. Heart follows time. Heart follows energy. These are timeless truths that we have to pay attention to. And if we don't, then what happens is we say we have certain values in life, but when it boils down to it, our time and our money and our energy is not aligned with the values. So let's begin with the topic of money. The subject or a subject that we all have to deal with and wrestle with on a regular basis. Here's a story for you. There's a story told about a rich, miserly old man who's lying on his deathbed, and he calls for his long-suffering wife to come in the room. And he says to her, I have worked very hard for all of my money, and I want to take my money with me when I die. And so he tells her, I want you to promise me that you'll put the money in the casket with me. And so after the man dies, the widow attends the memorial service with her best friend, and just before the funeral director closes the coffin, she places a small metal box inside the casket. And her friend looks at her in horror and said, surely you didn't put the money in the casket, did you? And she said, well, I promised him that I would. And so here's what I did. I got it all together. I deposited every penny of it into my account, and I wrote him a check. And if he can cash it, then he can spend it. Now, the truth is, some people act like they're going to take it all with them one day when they die. But you can't. Here's another story for you to ponder. I actually include this in the book. Back in 1928, a group of the world's most successful and wealthy men met at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. These people were there. The president of the largest utility company, the greatest wheat speculator, the president of the New York Stock Exchange, a member of the president's cabinet, the greatest bear on Wall Street, the president of the Bank of International Settlements, and the head of the world's largest monopoly. So collectively, these guys controlled more wealth than there was in the U.S. Treasury at the time. And for years, newspapers and magazines had been printing their success stories and urging the youth of the nation to follow their example. Well, guess what? 25 years later, here's what happened to each of those guys. The president of the largest independent steel company, Charles Schwab, lived on borrowed money the last 5 years of his life. He died broke. The great wheat speculator, Arthur Cutten, died overseas insolvent. The president of the NYSC, Richard Whitney, served a term in Sing Sing prison. The president's cabinet member, Albert Fall, was pardoned from prison so he could go and die at home. The greatest bear on Wall Street, Jesse Livermore, committed suicide. The president of the Bank of International Settlements, Leon Fraser, committed suicide. The head of the world's greatest monopoly, Ivar Druger, committed suicide. All of these men had learned how to make a lot of money, but not one of them had ever really learned how to truly live. If you look at the Gospels, Jesus' parables take up about roughly a third of the Gospels. And what you find when you study the parables is that many of them have to do with money and stuff. Money and possessions. Why? It's simple. He was well aware that this is one of the most challenging topics that we all face in life. He also knew that money is the number one idol for many people, and we know this because he said it. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and wealth. So Luke tells us that a man comes up and asks Jesus to arbitrate a family squabble. There was a fight between two brothers over the family inheritance, and Jesus refuses to get involved. But he uses this as a teaching moment. He tells the man, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And then he gives a parable. A rich man had a land that produced abundantly. He thought to himself, what should I do? Because I have no other place to store these crops. So he decided to tear down his barns and build larger ones so that he could store all the grain and the goods. And then he says to himself, soul, I now have ample goods laid up for many years to come. I can relax, I can eat, drink, and be merry. But God says to him, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and all the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God. Let me repeat that last verse. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. You know, in over 20 years of ordained ministry, I've done hundreds of weddings, and working with couples is actually something that I enjoy. I know Jay enjoys it. It's a joy to work with a couple that's going to get married. And we always talk about a lot of things, but one of the topics that we always talk about is money. And we talk about money because I want them to understand that all the different topics of marriage seem to culminate around the topic of money. Things like communication and expectations and lifestyles and vacations and houses and cars. So what many people find in marriage over the years is that money can become the root source of many problems and stresses and disagreements. That's why a guy like Dave Ramsey here in Nashville has built an empire with Financial Peace University, because people need help when it comes to their money and their planning. Children will grow up heavily influenced, for better or worse, by the way that their parents deal with money and what they teach them about money. The way that we spend our money and our time says more about who we are than anything else. Like I said, bank statements and calendars show our priorities in life. Money makes a great servant, but a terrible master. Our culture has now managed to convince lots of people that somehow our net worth dictates our self-worth, which is not true. Because there's lots of people who are very wealthy, but they're morally bankrupt. But isn't it funny that whenever we talk about this subject, especially in church, everybody kind of starts squirming a little bit? Why? Because it's uncomfortable. And my guess is that it was uncomfortable when Jesus talked about it back in first century Palestine. What message is he trying to convey through this parable? Why did Jesus call this man the rich fool? One message is this: greed is real. Jesus says, take care, be on your guard against all types of greed. Why is greed real? It's real because human beings have a tendency to be selfish. Fear causes us to keep more for ourselves than what we really need. And another problem with greed is we don't ever see it in ourselves. Have you noticed that? It's always somebody else who's greedy. That person. Not us, it's them. The rich man in this parable can't see beyond himself. He's only concerned with what he can do to store up his grain and his possessions. It's all about him. Just look at how many times he says I, me, my in the text. I have no place to store my crops. I will do this. I will build larger barns. I will store my grain. His attitude is very selfish. He's only concerned about himself. So instead of trying to find happiness by giving things away, he tries to find happiness by hoarding and keeping everything to himself. He's probably thinking to himself, who knows when times will get bad and I might need all this stuff. But can't we be guilty of this? Don't we sometimes find ourselves greedy and self-centered? Christianity is not a religion of I and me. It's a religion of we and us. And so when we become too focused on the I and the me, we forget that Christ is calling us to look out for each other, to share with each other, to serve each other. Remember what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said before his death a few years ago? He said, we've moved from this culture of us to me, and it's become a problem. Second lesson, Jesus says, your life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. What? Thought it did. I thought the rules of the game where everybody work as hard as you can and make sure that you have as much as you can and you can buy more stuff than your friends. Isn't that the game? No, that's not the game. That's a game people like to play. It's also a game that never ends, by the way. But guess what? Nobody ever wins that game. Because there's always somebody who has more than you, especially in Nashville, Tennessee, right? Your life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. If it did, then the people with the most stuff would be the happiest and the most fulfilled, right? Jesus says in verse 21, again, so it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. The problem with the man in this parable is that he stored up treasures on earth, and that's pretty much all he did. He didn't help. He wasn't generous. The game he played was the guy with the most toys wins. And unfortunately, that's a game that too many people play, and they miss out on one of the greatest joys of life, which is giving back and helping others. He was rich, but he was selfish. So Jesus called him a fool. Let's talk about time. Do you ever stop and take an honest inventory of how you spend your time every week? There are 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week. That's 168 hours. If you back out about 55 hours for sleeping and 13 hours for meals, that gives you 100 hours in a given week that you get to decide what you're going to do with it. 100 hours. How are you spending those hours? Do you waste them or do you make the most of them? You know, we all make decisions every day about how we will spend our time. Life is a constant series of decisions, and those decisions have consequences. We can't say that our children are important, but we miss all their games and plays. We can't say that our spouse is important, but we never carve out time for a date night or a trip with them. We can't say that our church is important, but we never come. We can't say that our faith is important, but we don't pray and read scripture and join a small group and serve. We can't say that our health is important if we never exercise and eat right and get enough sleep. I was at the Vandy game last night until about 11:15 and they lost. But I got enough sleep before this morning. The way we spend our time has to be consistent with our values, and if those things are not lining up, then we have to make some changes. but it's always up to us. Over the years, I have slowly, and I mean slowly, learned the power of saying no. And I've learned that because I have a wife and 3 children. And I can't do everything that I want to do. I can't be everywhere that I want to be. And it's not because the things that I'm invited to are important. They are. But we have to be very careful what we commit to and how we spend our time. Somebody recommended a book in our men's group this week called The Power of No. I haven't read it, but it sounds like a book I probably need to read this summer. I challenge you this week as we begin these summer months to do that 100-hour challenge and to ask yourself, where are my 100 hours going every week? How am I spending my time? Do I have control over it? Am I being intentional about it? What things are wasting my time, and how can I get some of that time back? And if you have some things that need to be changed, only you can change it, and summer's a pretty good time to change it. Lastly this morning, spiritual energy. We all have a finite amount of energy. Some people have more than others. Some people need more downtime than others. But here's the truth. If we go and we go and we go and we go and we never slow down, we will crash. And some of us have learned that the hard way. Some things in life give us energy, and some things in life drain our energy. Try to limit the things that drain your energy. Focus on the things that you are passionate about. Build in margin. Don't overschedule. Learn to say no. Technology has enabled us like never before to multitask. We can do so many things on these devices. We can text, we can shop, we can search the internet, we can check stocks and weather and all that stuff. The problem is we become addicted. We're always available, and we never turn it off. We have to recharge, we have to rest, and when you don't do that, your body will let you know. I'm always amazed when I go on vacation how tired I am. Usually it's because I've been going and going and going, and I just need to slow down and get some rest. The goal in life, I think, is to find a pace that works, a pace that is sustainable, and to learn to tap into the things that give us energy and to be around the people that give us energy. Paul says in Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. What are you doing this summer, as we begin this summer, so that your life can be full of these things? That's a question worth asking. That's a question worth wrestling with. Amen.